Americans. What is your insurance horror story?
Story 1. My dad is an oncologist, and he says there has been an uptick in the number of arbitrary denials, by insurance companies, for claims that should absolutely be covered under the patient's plan. When they're appealed, they'll often eventually be approved. But the whole process moves really slow, which can be a death sentence given early treatment is critical when dealing with cancer. It almost seems like the insurance companies are delaying on purpose, in the hopes that the patient will die before they have to pay for treatment. Story 2. My father got hospitalized for a week from heart failure, literally guaranteed death without getting medical help. Lungs were filled with fluid and he was effectively drowning. Insurance decided that the entire stay was completely unwarranted because, according to them, it didn't seem like he was sick enough. They didn't want to cover anything relating to it. While we were eventually successful, it took years to fight. Bill was in the six figures. Story 3. My wife had an emergency surgery for a spontaneous retinal detachment, literally minutes away from going blind. Insurance tried not to pay because she had not gotten pre-authorization, and then after that, claimed a spontaneous event was a pre-existing condition. Story 4. 2008 went into hospital for ruptured intestine due to Crohn's. Airlifted to Mayo Clinic high on fentanyl for the pain. Spent a month in hospital. Came out with no colon and looking like a Holocaust survivor. Wife felt like something was wrong. Went into OBGYN to check on baby. No heartbeat at 8 months. They induced labor. Buried son. Received a bill for $110K for Mayo Clinic which the insurance company denied. Received a bill for $20K for abortion which the insurance company denied. Spent 4 months of daily calls with hospital and insurance company fighting charges all the way down to $12K. Story 5. Not me, but someone I know was diagnosed with cancer in her early 30s. Her oncologist found cancer cells in her lymph nodes, indicating that it had metastasized, so he ordered a full-body MRI to assess where it had spread to. Her insurance denied it because they said she was too young to be considered at risk. Despite her actively having cancer, they did eventually approve it, but not without a lot of pressure from her doctor. Story 6. My father was a doctor with a pre-existing condition before Obamacare, which meant the only health insurance he could get was through his state's pool of last resort. It took 30% of his income as he was self-employed and working in a very rural area. He was the only physician in his specialty for 75 miles, and when things got desperate for his patients would allow them to pay in piano lessons, vegetables, whatever instead of cash if they needed to. He had a stroke and died on his bathroom floor but lived on life support for 4 more days. $350,000 later, including a $70K helicopter flight for 30 miles. A man who dedicated his life to medicine and donated all of his organs to science died less than broke because of healthcare costs. Story 7. My wife just got her 3rd denial for authorization from UHC for an MRI on her hip that her doctor has been trying to get her for over a year. The first reason she didn't submit x-rays. Submitted x-rays, reapplied. The second reason she hadn't done PT before the request. Submitted evidence that she has done PT on and off for 7 years. To no improvement, reapplied. The third reason she needs to have x-rays done first. This AI auto-rejection cruelty is par for the course. Story 8. My surgery to remove ovarian cancer surgically was deemed elective. The type I had wouldn't respond to chemo or radiation therapies. But since it wasn't going to immediately kill me, it was just because I wanted it apparently. Had to pay $6K out of pocket. Story 9. My girlfriend had kidney failure as a child and had been in dialysis for over 15 years. She graduated college and was working as a teacher. She had to stop due to complications with her condition and go on disability. This was prior to Obamacare, so we tried to get coverage from all the insurance companies since it's impossible for anyone to afford dialysis without insurance. Every single company declined to cover her due to her pre-existing condition. They essentially told her that she was too expensive to live. Story 10. I got super sick when I was 7, and had an extended hospital stay. Unfortunately, it happened during a brief lapse in my dad's employment history, so we were briefly between insurance. I later found out my parents went bankrupt, and my dad had to take on higher-paying jobs he hated in order to pay it off. He eventually worked himself to death. Almost literally, he worked so many hours of overtime he fell asleep at the wheel and drove off the road and crashed into a tree. Worst day of my life. He should have been enjoying his retirement by now, instead he's been gone for years, and my mom still struggles with depression and being a widow. America needs universal health care. Story 11. Daughter was born prematurely around Christmas. Spent 3 weeks in the NICU. After a week and a half she was downgraded from NICU level 2 to NICU level 1. Nothing changed. She was in the same unit, in the same bed, she was just no longer on a feeding tube. Insurance counted her downgrade from NICU 2 to NICU 1 as a new admission rather than a continuation of care. Because we had crossed calendar years, her new admission was subject to a new calendar year of copays, deductibles, and max out-of-pocket expenses. That meant that for a single 3-week NICU visit we were charged max copay, max deductible, and max out-of-pocket expenses against 2 years of coverage. Fought it for over a year before the hospital threatened to take it to collections, so we eventually gave up and paid it off. We had a good policy and the max out-of-pocket for each year was only $4,500. For $9,000 total for a NICU bill that exceeded $350,000, but that extra $4,500 for a second year we knew we shouldn't have been required to pay sure stung. Story 12. My daughter was born early and spent 7 weeks in the NICU, When she got out we got a bill for something like $400,000 and it took months to get the hospital and insurance company to sort it out. We have stacks of paperwork showing that everything has been settled, but every so often we get a letter or a call from one of them because they randomly decided that we still owe them $100,000. Story 13 far less severe than what I'm sure will populate this thread, but a terrific example of the nonsense that is American health insurance. During COVID, I was working for a Hawaii-based organization, but on the East Coast, someone in my office popped positive for COVID, so everyone in the office went to a testing site to get tested. My claim for the COVID test was denied, because I didn't go to one of the approved testing sites for my insurer. All of the approved sites were in Hawaii. At the time, you couldn't travel to Hawaii without proof of a negative COVID test, so the only way I could get the cost of a COVID test covered was if I went to an approved testing site, but in order to travel to any of the approved testing sites, I needed to show a negative COVID test. Story 14 I work for a DME company. We exist solely for the shareholders in hopes of packaging and selling the company to a larger company like Medtronic. Our income is largely, perhaps mostly, based on overbilling Medicare. We waive patient costs all the time on the basis that we will still make record profits year over year if Medicare pays their part less than half the time they're asked to. This is happening at scale across the entire healthcare industry. The system is utterly vampiric. Healthcare could be so much cheaper if there wasn't an entire for-profit industry dedicated to exploiting our poorly constructed state health system. Story 15 I got hurt at work, suffered an amputation on site with no pain meds. They slowly pulled my toes off with my crushed boot. My family lost our health insurance at the end of the month because I wasn't working, but it's okay. Cobra was only $2,500. Story 16 as a Brit staring down the scope in horror at the US, I genuinely wonder how any of you survive after things like this. Not only my condolences for lost loved ones, irreplaceable property lost, etc., but my most profound respect for enduring it all. My country is on what feels like the brink of a different form of collapse. Our politicans are too busy arguing over sandwiches to realize the writing on the wall. Collectively something needs to change, and it's not going to come from government. I wish you all the best, honestly. Story 17 not me. The mother of my wife's work friend. Her house outside of Gulfport AL was flattened by Katrina, and she spent the rest of her life living in hotels and rentals while her home insurance and the government-managed flood insurance argued over whether a storm surge is wind or flood damage. Story 18 I moved to Georgia and had to apply for Medicaid because my job didn't offer insurance. I got an official letter stating, "You qualify for Medicaid, however, we are not going to give it to you." Since Georgia had refused to participate in the federal Medicaid expansion, I went without insurance for the next 2 years and almost died. Story 19 husband was getting a stem cell transplant to treat his stage 4 lymphoma. The morning of the procedure, the hospital realized we didn't have insurance because he had recently quit his job, ran out of FMLA, and the previous employer had not submitted the paperwork to Cobra. We had to contact them to fax a form, and I had to write a check for $1,600 to cover the previous 2 months of Cobra so his transplant could proceed. If my sister hadn't have gone to HS with that transplant coordinator, and I didn't have $2,000 in my bank, he wouldn't be here today. Story 20 I worked in billing, and the amount of patients scammed by Medicare regarding their yearly physical. Yes, it's free, but if you deviate on anything it's not free and you're charged for it. So don't tell your doc your knee hurts or you have a hangnail during that visit. Also check your insurance for colonoscopies. If you do the Cologuard at home test, and it comes back positive so you have to go in and have an actual colonoscopy, it may not be covered as preventative and you'll get charged. Story 21 definitely not as bad as others for sure, but being a T1 diabetic, you basically are at the mercy of drug prices. South Dakota also only has 2 if you're not on a corporate plan health insurance companies which, ironically, are part of the 2 health systems in the state of Era and Sanford. My insulin copay seems to change constantly. The real issue that stuck in my craw is my blood work. I went to a small clinic hospital to get work done and was charged $800 for routine blood work that typically costs me around $30. Called the clinic and asked why it was so expensive. They said it was because the test was taken in the hospital and not the clinic. That's just their policy. This is a while ago, so I'm not entirely sure if it was a policy of the medical side or insurance side, but since Avera is both the healthcare and insurance company, I guess it doesn't much matter. Months later I mentioned this to my endocrinologist, who then mentioned Quick Labs. It's an unadvertised blood test that covers everything I need for $75. Of course this is unadvertised. Anyway, my fellow South Dakota diabetics, ask for Avera Quick Labs if your current blood work is ungodly expensive. No appointment necessary at participating facilities. Story 22 I've gone 10 years with a rotting wisdom tooth since I haven't been able to afford the extraction. Got denied at my last muni job. Ended up finding another where I would qualify after 6 months probation. Story 23 So, I am a diabetic. My doctor wanted Lantus insulin, but insurance wanted another, cheaper insulin that's not as effective, Basaglar. So my doctor doubled the dosage. So my insurance decided to make the dosage 2 times 14 days worth 2 weeks a month instead of 30 days worth, so I had to pay the copay twice a month. That meant 28 days a month, and most months except February have more than 28 days. I ended up having to ration my insulin, and the copay went from 25 for 14 days to 65 for 14 days in less than 2 years. That meant I had to go to the pharmacy, stand in line, and get refills every 14 days, and the pharmacy ran out a lot, so I had to come back. I can't drive, so I had to walk a mile to CVS down the road for this and other medicines. I just started buffering a week at a time just so I could deal with this inconsistency. How come your blood sugar never goes down? The doctor asked. I told him, and he shook his head, saying this was so common. He tried swapping insulin types or increasing the dosages, but insurance said no. My A1C was like 10. Then I ended up on TRICARE, because I married someone in the military. I got Lantus, Trulicity, and boom, my A1C dropped to 6 in less than a year. I know the military has efficiency issues, but I pay nothing out of pocket in TRICARE, no copay, no prescriptions, and no fees. It's like $58 a month for my wife's pension for the both of us. I mean, socialized medicine will work in this country. The companies just don't want it to. When my first wife died, the military officer was my second marriage. Her insurance dropped her because she was dead. Then they sent her a $230,000 hospital bill for her last week of life because she was on a ventilator in critical care. No, I don't live in a communal property state, but they sent her to collections, and heavily implied illegally that I had to pay. I didn't. Let me repeat this: they sent my dead wife to collections, then lied that I had to pay because she was dead. Bill collectors called me at work, called our son, and even my sister. Not her sister, my sister. I had legal notices and bills for her in her name, coming as late as 8 years after her death. In fact, twice. She had a summons to go to court, then a summons for arrest for failure to appear in court. However, that sheriff had common sense and took her death certificate. He even said he was sorry for bothering me. Crazy. For my first pregnancy, everything was covered under my plan without issue. For my second on the same plan, I figured it would be the same. Turns out, the company decided that they would only cover office visits, and any lab work was not covered in that. No blood work, no ultrasounds, nothing. When I called to get clarification, they were super vague and would just keep repeating office visits are fully covered. But what does an office visit include? Office visits are fully covered. I was directed to check my plan, which was just as vague. After paying for everything out of pocket, my child has the audacity to be born 2 months into the new plan year, so we had to start all over with the deductible. Story 24, not American, Canadian here. 2 years ago we rented a house near a beach in northeast USA. We have 3 kids and our youngest was 1 year old at that time. She couldn't stop crying, it was insane. We tried Tylenol and everything we could, but at a point we said let's go to the hospital. I was not happy about spending 12 hours in an emergency room during our vacations, but whatever to. Turns out it took legit 15 minutes in and out of the hospital. She had an otitis. I couldn't believe how fast and efficient it was, and everyone was happy. 6 months later we received a letter from a collection agency. We owed $18,000 USD for that 15 minutes visit. We had insurance and we never paid it, but had to fight until recently to get a final letter from them saying we owe nothing. Our insurance company was not happy with how the hospital billed them and decided to request a revised invoice. Hospital basically set off and charged us instead. Story 25, got a bill from an anesthesiologist a week shy of 18 months and 2 weeks into the calendar year after my kid was born for $2,000. Insurance tried to tell me the bill would count as the current calendar year instead of when services happened. Took a couple months of just try and take my money phone calls, but I eventually won. 0 BTW. This was United Healthcare. Story 26, not much of a horror story, but more of a how the is this a thing it doesn't make any sense type of story. I had to get a type of scan. It was actually cheaper to pay out of pocket than to go through my insurance. It would have cost me an extra 50-ish, 250-ish versus 300-ish if I went through my insurance. Story 27, my daughter was born with cystic fibrosis. We knew she was going to have this due to genetic testing that was done before she was born. She was denied insurance the day she was admitted into the NICU because she had a pre-existing condition since it was known in the womb that she would have CF. I had to fight with insurance literally the day she was born. This was shortly before Obamacare ended that bullshit. P.S. I will never vote for a Republican again in my life for so much as a dog catcher for how they demonized it because a Democrat passed it. Story 28, got a couple. Wife has a form of epilepsy, temporal lobe epilepsy. It all started when she was in her late 20s. At the time I was working nuclear power and we were in a refueling outage, so I was on nights. Came home at about 6 a.m. and she was still up journaling, which was very unusual. She wasn't particularly coherent, so I glanced at what she was writing and it was page after page after page of mostly incoherent gibberish from a stream of consciousness that was broken. Now, keep in mind, I had quite good insurance at the time as a white-collar utility worker. I managed to get her to go to bed to try to sleep, and managed a couple hours myself, but she was back up and writing a couple hours later. I called a psychologist she had seen for unrelated things years prior to get direction. I was way out of my wheelhouse. She had me pass the phone to her, talked for a bit, and then had her give the phone back to me and said come by at 5 p.m. and we'll see what we should do next. We get over there and after some time she advises we need to go to a specific emergency room that can handle psychiatric evaluations, as psychiatrists are backed up for upwards of 6 months for new patients around here. We get there and a decision is made to commit her to an inpatient facility involuntarily. She wasn't a self-harm risk, but as far as we can gather the doctor was pissed that she wouldn't sign forms and let them draw blood without myself or her dad who came with us saying it was okay, because even though she was compromised mentally she recognized that much and wanted someone she trusted to say it was okay. In the end she was transferred via sheriff's office drunk wagon think box van with diamond plate benches while handcuffed and drugged up 20 miles or so to the facility at 4 in the morning, and all we could do was follow it there in a car and hug her goodbye. She was then kept isolated for a week at the facility and ultimately discharged as general psychosis with antipsychotic medications and several others. After months of fighting with insurance for tests, we finally got a referral to a neurologist approved, who diagnosed the seizure disorder and started her on anti-seizure medications. It was like flipping a light switch, and she was mostly accepting the antipsychotics she had to wean from back to normal. That was almost 15 years ago, and now every job insurance change we take, it's a battle of prior authorizations and coverage for medication that is necessary for her to live a normal life. Most recently, the prior authorization was approved and we got the first month of meds just fine. The second month the insurance said we needed to switch to a 90-day fill. Fine, no issues there, except when the pharmacy went to fill it was denied. After days of us calling and the pharmacy calling, they finally said we needed another prior authorization because now the cost crossed a threshold since it was a 90-day fill. Started that process and got the runaround for about 2 weeks. After a lot of calls between us, the pharmacy, the doctor, and Cigna with no movement, the pharmacist finally got a three-way call going between them, the doctor and Cigna, and they got it approved, yay, except that it was going to result in the pharmacy losing close to $1,000 per fill every 90 days. They are a local pharmacy and were upfront that they couldn't do that. We tried to transfer to a commercial pharmacy and nope, then to mail order from Cigna's Express Scripts. After a few days they told us without telling us the reason, but we know why, that they couldn't fill it. In the end, her neurologist managed to work with their university-affiliated hospital and get it filled as effectively an uncovered necessary medication under some federal program, and that's where we are now. Next up, my son was a normal vaginal birth, but our costs after insurance, working for a worldwide major engineering firm in nuclear construction at the time, ended up being $7,500 out of pocket. Luckily I earned enough and we knew it was going to be a chunk of money. There was only one insurance plan to choose from, so we had it covered. That compares to my daughter, who was born on my prior job's insurance at an out-of-pocket cost of less than $1,000, with cheaper individual premiums than the current insurance at the time, of course. The company was covering a lot more. Next up, my son is anaphylactic to peanuts, lentils and lupin, has to have an EpiPen. Every year we have to get at least 3 sets because the school requires one to be checked in with a nurse. We need one for home, and one for daycare. Insurance only lets you get one filled each month, so each year we have to spend 3 months trying to get them filled so they can be checked in, as they won't take any expired medications. With our most recent change, Cigna required a prior auth for the EpiPen. Not brand, mind you, a generic epinephrine autoinjector, WTF. Story 29, not mine, but I was speaking to a doctor who was talking about how he had considered quitting after having to fight insurance about giving people life-changing migraine treatments with proven efficiency instead of cheaper, minimal to no evidence-based medicines that did jack. Story 30, this is super tame and not a terrible ending, but it does show how up the system is. I'm diagnosed ADHD, take Adderall, been using Adderall, specifically the name brand, for like 2 years, and my 30-day supply costs me $10. I received a notice from my provider that they were dropping Adderall from their covered medications. I forget this and order my meds, and the pharmacist says that'll be $630. Holy, okay, is there generics? Yes, but your script is 15 milligrams dosage. Generics are only 10 milligrams. You'll need an updated script from the doctor to get your supply as 1 to 12 10 milligrams pills. I got it taken care of within a week, but just shows how at the drop of a hat my meds went from covered in $10 to not in $600. Story 31, just spent $2,000 on a routine annual physical with blood work because I switched insurances 3 months ago due to job loss, and my policy requires 6-month waiting period for anything preventative. Should have read the fine print, but when I went to go look for it, it was a single line item in a 50-page document. My 5 payments of $50 just went to 27 payments of $50. Story 32, being charged $10,000 because I stayed in a hospital for 1 hour after being bitten by a caterpillar. My arm swelled up, which is why I was there, and they prescribed me medicine. I bought the medicine and that was worth $10,000 to them. Story 33, my wife's doctor wanted her to get a second type of breast screen since the mammogram didn't get good visualization, and they didn't like something they saw. The insurance company denied the screen, but had an appeal address. The appeal was right back to the insurance company, which of course denied it again. We were forced to shell out $1,000 out of pocket or just hope my wife didn't have breast cancer. Of course we paid, and nothing was wrong, but insurance companies do not care about doctor recommendations. $1,000 is a lot of money, but I know there are literally thousands of cases that are worse than ours, and I know that someday, I might need this company that I've paid thousands and thousands of dollars throughout my life to be there to help, and they may just give me the middle finger and watch me die, and crow about their quarterly earnings to their investors the next day. Story 34, my brother was murdered by United Healthcare. They fought him and denied every single test, treatment, and prescription until it was too late and he was terminal. Story 35, my wife occasionally gets tachycardia, elevated heart rate. Usually, she pops an atenolol and lays down for 20 minutes and it gets better. A few months back, it just wouldn't go down for several hours. It was a Saturday night, so nothing but the ER was open. Went, got triaged, got observed, got an EKG, got some basic blood work, and after a couple of hours, her HR just went back to normal. Doc said nothing in the blood work looked unusual, and we got cleared to go home. The bill was $1,700 after insurance. Before insurance, it was closer to $3,000. To sit in the ER for a couple of hours mostly just by ourselves in a room, have an EKG, get blood work and go home. Story 36. My company decided not to auto-renew our health insurance this year, and only let us know by email that they were doing this. I came to find in mid-December that me, my wife and my 4 kids will have no insurance in 2025. They've auto-renewed every year except this one and did it because plans had changed significantly. The plan I had in 2024 is available at the same cost in 2025. Fun. Story 37. Doctors kept trying to switch pain meds for my wife. She was on daily doses of morphine and it was building up in her system too much. Insurance kept saying they need more reasons to switch meds. She died last year to toxic effects of morphine. I felt joy when that CEO was taken down. Story 38. I developed carpal tunnel for my old office job. It was under work comp because it was an injury sustained from work. My company I worked for was absolutely phenomenal. Insurance was another story. I ended up developing complex regional pain syndrome from the carpal tunnel surgery. It took 15 years for my surgery to get to a point that I had a treatment plan in place because insurance wanted to fight me and my doctors every step of the way. I've since settled with the work comp insurance. Part of my settlement is ongoing treatment, surgeries, doctor's appointments, and anything that will help me with my CRPS like a cane or shower chair for example. Since we've settled, I have zero issues getting anything I need pushed through immediately. Story 39. My little sister was hired to work in a call center that processed denials. She worked from home during COVID. She doesn't work for an insurance company, they contract this out. People call in, they give their info usually already on the screen from caller ID. She reads the script. She has no knowledge, no power, no ability to forward their claims to someone who does. Literally her job is to be a warm body to read the script that says no. People would be begging her, and she would be reciting the script and scrolling Instagram. She had no power, no way to escalate, no knowledge. And this is the person you call when your claim is denied. Story 40. In a place where getting a new cardiologist is a 3-month wait. My mom got a letter from a heart failure clinic saying they no longer accept her insurance. Now it's up to her GP to monitor until she can get into a new one at the other hospital. Story 41. I underwent treatment for endometriosis and the insurance company would deny my medication and request a prior authorization for every refill. The drug is approved for this use, so it's on label. Problem is, I bleed internally because of the endometrial tissue having spread to my digestive tract and adhering to other internal organs. So when they made me do paperwork for each refill, I would be bleeding internally into other organs and into my abdominal cavity while I waited for the medication that blocked the hormone production that caused the bleeding. This condition has caused a 30% paralysis of my digestive tract, so I spent that time in excruciating pain with vomiting. Fun part is it appears to have not worked and am trying to get a hysterectomy with the ovaries removed to stop the hormone production, and I just know this is going to be a joy to argue with insurance, as if it's not hard enough to get a doctor to agree to the procedure because you might want kids one day. But my ovaries are polycystic and constantly hemorrhagic and am technically menopausal, am married and in my 30s and we don't want kids, but apparently we aren't the ones who get to decide that. Story 42. A family member was dying of cancer and there was some kind of medication keeping her alive that was $40,000 per monthly dose. Then her insurance dropped her, her family did a GoFundMe, they had in-person fundraisers in town, and so many people came together to contribute, it was heartwarming to see. They raised enough money for 2 more doses, 2 more months, before she died. I don't know how much longer she would have lived with that medication. I guess we will never know, but at least some CEO got an extra $40K per month for a few months. Story 43. I thank my stars for living somewhere with universal healthcare. My socialist brain cannot simply comprehend the daily trauma you all must go through. Even the healthiest of people must live in fear. One day you can have it all, the next, through no fault of your own, a stray strand of DNA corrupts and bang, you have cancer, and not only do you have to face the fact you could die, but also become bankrupt and end up on the streets losing everything. Just because some faceless corporation says no, our shareholders prefer the money. On a side note, if you did get cancer and your life-saving treatment was denied, and you then decide to take out your frustration on a CEO of a particular faceless corporation, could you theoretically use self-defense as a legal defense? They're the head of the entity that decides you should die, and taking out that frustration is you trying to defend your life. Story 44. This long, sorry. Read the whole thing for the dichotomy of US healthcare, or just skip the next 3 paragraphs to go right to the nightmare part. A little over a decade ago my mother was hospitalized at the end of August. It's a long story, but what was supposed to be a routine surgery to correct a routine problem turned into an emergency surgery to save her from amputation. The surgery was performed by an expert who had published papers on the feasibility of such a procedure, but had never come across a situation that warranted the risk, until my mother ended up on his table. The surgery was a success. More than one person came to tell us about how they've never seen such a procedure done. The procedure was more than experimental. Up until that point it was theoretical anyway. The surgery was a success, and the care she received at that hospital is what people talk about when they say the US has the best healthcare in the world, but she was old and had a long medical history that complicated her recovery. She got multiple infections including MRSA, and she was allergic to many of the antibiotics, which complicated things. She was put into isolation. No one could visit her without suiting up. She was still in the hospital in mid-January when my father got a bill for almost $1 million from a hospital. His employer changed insurance carriers with the new year. Insurer A said it was BS responsibility to pay since they were the company now. Insurer B said pre-existing condition and refused to pay anything. My father fought with the insurance companies for weeks. He called HR, he hired a lawyer, then he hired more lawyers. Every month the bill increased by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ultimately the best option anyone would come up with was divorce your wife. She was a stay-at-home mother her whole life. She had no savings, nothing in her name. She could file for bankruptcy alone, file for hardship exemptions with the hospital. Maybe get Medicaid and try to get it applied retroactively. Maybe that would save them, maybe so. Only a few months before my parents' 45th wedding anniversary, my father had to go to my mother's hospital bed, where she had been for 6 months, and tell her I need to divorce you. My mother agreed to the divorce, but she didn't really understand. She was on a ton of painkillers on top of everything else. All she really understood is she has been in the hospital for half a year, and now her husband wanted a divorce. Just before the divorce was finalized, my father got a call from the head of HR informing him my mother's care would be approved. Turns out my dad's coworkers had been covering for him, missing so much work, and it got to the point where it couldn't be covered anymore. Him being MIA most days was starting to cause issues. Some C-suite guy came down hard on my dad's boss and amazingly listened to what was going on. He heard the story, got the info from HR and called the insurer up and basically told them cover her or we change insurers next year. This is the first time I've written this story down, but when I tell it I usually get someone tell me how lucky we were that the guy went to bat for my dad, how great it is to have executives who care. And I usually nod and agree, because yeah, we were lucky, but I'm honestly more enraged than happy, because every step of the way my mother was at the mercy of people who didn't give a about the human being she was. Even that exec only did what he did because it was negatively impacting his business. Mom eventually got out of the hospital, but she never really recovered. She had developed health issues that could only be managed, not cured, and was confined to a wheelchair. Delay of care while fighting insurance played into it, but the whole ordeal just broke her. She lost her fight. She became afraid to go anywhere and get hurt, or see the doctor and risk bankrupting the family. My father retired a few years later to care for my mom. In doing so he neglected his own health and the cancer was caught too late. Mom passed shortly after him, refusing treatments that could have helped her because she missed her husband and was afraid to cost her grandchildren what little they stood to inherit. As far as I'm concerned, insurance companies killed my parents. They just did it very, very slowly. Story 45 son was born with a 9mm hole in his heart. Insurance denied the surgery request from the doc. We found out a day later it was because the doctor's office requested the wrong code. But, ooh boy, there were some dark thoughts that day. Story 46 wife was working for a non-profit using Insurance A. She worked for 3 to 4 years with this Insurance A, meeting requirements for length of time to apply towards future maternity leave and whatnot. About 6 months before she got preggo for the first time, her company switched to Insurance B. She asked questions and was assured that the time she had put in towards qualifying for certain maternity leave standards would count. Cut to the birth. Insurance B says she has not been on this plan for long enough to qualify for the benefits that she was assured she would receive. Ended with her being paid half of what she thought and only for 4 weeks because Insurance B basically denied her full maternity leave benefits due to the switch made by her employer. We are lucky to have supplemental income which enabled her to take the full 12 weeks, and we're pretty frugal folks in general, but it was a total ass ache and really highlighted the need for universal maternity leave guarantees for employees.